I walked through the middle of the block and I looked at both sides of the street. It was gone. And I didn't want to break down in the street and cry because it was gone. The history was gone.
They got the people out, then they tore the whole thing down and built expensive housing.
In the 1950s and 60s, the federal government forced 300,000 families from their homes.
The human tragedy is incalculable.
This is the story of the destruction and survival of one community. Philip Payton Jr. wanted to end residential segregation in New York City.
Payton was the premier black realtor of the day.
In 1905, he began buying and leasing buildings on West 99th and 98th Streets, two all-white blocks on Manhattan's Upper West Side. Then he rented apartments to blacks.
Blacks were saying, why shouldn't they have the opportunity to rent there in this aristocratic part of the city?
West 99th and 98th Streets between Columbus Avenue and Central Park West became home to a community of musicians and writers. Arturo Schomburg lived on 99th Street along with James Weldon Johnson and Billie Holiday.
When Billie Holiday came to town, everybody was, just to see her come in, with her glamorous self, and if she was in show business,
Many families stayed on West 99th and 98th Streets for generations.
My grandfather came from South Carolina to 99th Street. I was born there in 99th Street, so that's all we ever knew was 99th Street.
I started thinking about 99th Street and trying to see how many people that I remembered that lived in those houses. My parents were married in 29 West 99th Street, February 5th, 1914.
There were eyes watching you. You could go down the street and you could count on my Aunt Dee being in her top floor window looking out the window.
I better not do nothing. And by the time I got home, my mother knew about it because somebody done told my mother.
I really believe anybody that lived in West 99th and West 98th Street loved it. And when we had to move, we were just devastated.
In 1949, President Truman signed the National Housing Act, creating a federal program called Urban Renewal.
This vast, unprecedented federal housing program gave cities the power of eminent domain. Substantial areas of the city were taken from the owner.
The goal was to replace chaotic old neighborhoods with planned communities.
What was once a run-down, dying section of the great city of New York has been recreated.
Talk to people about urban renewal. Oh, what a great thing we're doing for the poor people.
The slum means disease and crime. The new projects mean health and happiness.
West 99th and 98th Streets were declared a slum in 1951, and everyone living there was told they'd have to leave.
There are definitions of slums, the income level of the families. But while these people were poor, that didn't mean that they had a bad life, as long as they had their neighborhood.
Everybody was aiming for the same thing. Everybody would finish school, get a good job, help support your parents, get married, have a family. It was togetherness that I cannot explain to you any more better than what I'm doing.
At 13, I'm looking forward to all these things that my older siblings had experienced, and we had to move. There is a space in my life right now that's missing because of that move.
The new housing was to be built not by the government, but by private companies handpicked by the city.
For the first time in history, the city could condemn a piece of property and turn it over to a private individual.
Robert Moses, who was head of New York's Slum Clearance Committee, had the power to pick and choose which companies got the condemned land.
They would take over these large chunks of its incredibly valuable real estate. Imagine real estate in Manhattan.
He gave it out as political favors to his allies in the Democratic Party.
All of the contracts came through the political clubs. They gave them to their friends who were builders or realtors or phony corporations.
West 99th and 98th Streets and 4 surrounding blocks were sold for a token sum to a group of local Democratic Party apparatchiks. 5 years later, the original buildings were only partially torn down.
There might have been a couple of houses people were still living in. There were some diehards, they wouldn't move.
We had no heat, no hot water. We still stayed till it became an emergency and they had to get us out of there.
Why did you keep staying?
That was our home. I couldn't understand why they wanted to tear my home down. It was not a slum.
I tell people I never left the old neighborhood. That is my village. That's my village. When I was young, it was painful. And I got past that, and I think most of us did, by remembering what was good. And the older I get, the stronger that feeling gets.
I feel pretty sad when I go by now. So many memories.
And they said it would last. That's right.
We laugh about it, but yet it's a sad feeling. I feel that something was just taken away from us.
Kill the Medallion Bill!
It's about being free in this United States of America.
We know tyranny when we smell it, and we are not going to take this stinking smell again.
Washington, D.C. taxi driver Nathan Price keeps his cab in the basement of his Virginia apartment building. After driving into the district and picking up a few fares, he generally stops by a local hangout to meet up with other drivers. Price, who's now 68, is like almost all D.C. cab drivers, an owner-operator who works when he wants to.
What's it mean for you to own your own cab or to be able to set your own hours as a cab driver?
Total freedom.
Total freedom.
And it's nothing like it.
I can go to work anytime I feel like it. I can quit anytime I feel like it. So I get a schedule as to what suits me.
DC's cab industry is among the freest in the nation, allowing flexibility for drivers and relatively open access to thousands of immigrants who earn their livelihood driving a cab in the district.
This industry was a stepping stone for free slaves before the Civil War. It was a stepping stone for immigrants from Europe at the turn of the 20th century.
It took my business away from me. You just took the free enterprise out of my life. That's what we're facing right now.
Now, Washington, D.C. is considering a bill that would require every cab in the district to have a permit known as a medallion. The city would only issue 4,000 medallions, cutting the total number of cabs by more than a third and putting thousands of drivers out of work.
Kill the Medallion Bill! Kill the Medallion Bill now!
A minority of cabbies who have been driving for at least 5 years and live in Washington, D.C. would get the medallions first.
Even though I was born and raised in the district, started driving, but the past 15 years I've lived in Virginia, I get a pink slip.
Price would still have a shot at getting one of those 4,000 medallions since he's been driving for more than 20 years, but only after they're first offered to cab companies, who could then turn around and rent them to drivers.
They're being set up to say you commit to renting, which means you commit to giving up a portion of your earnings, or you get out. We don't do that to anyone in any other profession.
It's a scenario that's been repeated across the country. Over and over, medallion systems have pushed out individual entrepreneurs and put them to work for politically connected companies.
In Prince George's County, the cab companies rent their cabs to cab drivers at $330 a week. In Montgomery County, upwards of $100 a day. They're working long hours to give more than half of their earnings to the medallion owner.
Proponents of the medallion bill say putting companies in charge would benefit riders. But a 2010 study by the city's Department of Finance argued the opposite. Cities with medallions have fares that are 25% higher.
When you're creating a system where the medallion owner can create artificial scarcity in service, riders are going to have less cabs available to them.
These big cab companies, they will take charge of everything.
The man behind the medallion proposal is Jerry Schaefer. He's a local taxi cab magnate who runs a bunch of companies that are headquartered here in the River Terrace neighborhood in Northeast Washington, D.C. Up front, he'll get a whole bunch of the medallions when they're offered for sale at $10,000 a piece. And then he'll be able to turn those into real cash by either renting the cabs out to local drivers or selling the medallions at a profit.
Schaefer hired lobbyist John Ray to write the medallion bill. Ray has worked as a lawyer defending Representative Harry Thomas in an ongoing corruption suit, and it was Thomas who sponsored Ray's bill in the D.C. City Council. The last time a medallion bill was proposed, it was later withdrawn by Councilmember Jim Graham, after his chief of staff was caught by the FBI accepting a bribe from a representative of the taxi industry.
Thank you very much. I need it. That's why I take it.
This job is providing food for our families. We need to stand up and do not let them take our business away from us.
In a letter published in the Washington Post, lobbyist John Ray argued that because the cab industry is open entry and unregulated, it's been susceptible to corruption. But in practice, the D.C. Taxi Commission, which currently regulates the industry, has its own history of corruption. And the commission is so wary of scrutiny that when reporter Pete Tucker snapped this photo on his cell phone at a recent public meeting, he was dragged out and arrested.
Sir, this is a public meeting.
Last chance.
Sir, this is a public meeting.
Last chance.
Reason TV producer Jim Epstein captured Tucker's arrest on his mobile phone. Later, Epstein was also arrested after resisting attempts by the Taxi Commission and U.S. Park Police to confiscate his camera phone. When Tucker was arrested, cab drivers stormed out of the meeting in protest.
We will continue to struggle for the continuation of the guarantee of our rights to earn our living. We know tyranny when we smell it. And we are not going to take this stinking smell again.
We don't want your medallions. We do not want your medallions.
We want to be free entrepreneurs in this town, period.
Nobody has bothered us until last year, the 29th of June. That was the beginning of my nightmare.
I'm getting scared. I'm really getting scared, I barely make it on what I have now.
This desolate patch of desert on the outskirts of Los Angeles County is known as the Antelope Valley. Few people want to live here, and the collection of rugged individualists who do are being chased away by what the county officials call nuisance abatement teams. Armed county inspection squads that target zoning and code violations. The plight of these desert dwellers made regional headlines when Kim Fahey's home, known as Phonehenge, was raided by a nuisance abatement team. A colorful castle built by Fahey himself out of old telephone poles, Phonehenge was a gift to the media, which covered the county's prosecution of Fahey as an offbeat, human interest story. But Fahey was convicted of 12 misdemeanors. He's been jailed and forced to destroy his own home. So have many other Valley property owners targeted by the county's code enforcement forces, and many of these folks have even fewer resources than Fahey.
This guy had this property for sale for a good price. So I came out here and looked at it and said, wow, this is pretty cool.
Joey Gallo is a retired Army veteran who served during the Vietnam era. Last year, the county began performing unannounced inspections on his property.
Government came out and they told me that my bushes and stuff out here had to be cut back. I said, okay, no problem.
Gallo says he cooperated with the county, clearing brush, then moving a shed, then getting rid of his motorhome. Finally, the county made a demand that shocked him.
They told me, we have to get off the property. I said, I get off the property. He says, well, yeah, you can't live here.
Gallo says county officials told him that neighbors, whom they would not identify, had complained about unsightly structures on his property. He could keep his land, they told him, but would not be allowed to live on it.
I looked at them and I said, well, for what? My closest neighbor is like a half a mile away. We're not living in Beverly Hills here. This is my home. All of a sudden, we got police at my front door, bulletproof vests, guns, and then they surrounded the place. Everything I worked for, was like just melting away from me. I don't know where I'm going to go. I really don't.
Miles from Gallo and a remote corner of the Antelope Valley, Oscar Castaneda has also been ordered to destroy his own property. Castaneda is a mechanic and a Seventh-day Adventist preacher, and he also happens to own the church where the movies Kill Bill 1 and 2 were shot. Like many of the residents here, Castaneda and his wife grow their own food, supply their own power with solar panels, and their own water from a well. Their green energy lifestyle is a choice, not subsidized by the government.
As a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we believe in living independent of the city, living by yourself.
Castaneda lived in the desert for 22 years without any help from or problems with the government. That changed last year.
The city and some other cars drew right into my property. They said that they were here to help me. And I don't know in which way they are helping me.
The government officials, who had entered without a warrant, left after taking pictures, says Castaneda. But this was the first of many visits.
If you don't know the rights, you don't have any. So when they came the first time, the second time, the third time, and the fourth time, I didn't know that I had to ask them for a warrant.
Members of the nuisance abatement team began pointing out compliance problems, too many vehicles on the property, improper water tank, and so on. All of these, the county said to him, are a nuisance and a danger to his neighbors.
Right here, going looking north, there is no neighbor. There are 1 and 2 abandoned houses. I don't have no neighbors over here, let's say 10 miles, and no neighbors over here, another 10 miles. So I'm living in the middle of nowhere, okay, and I'm not bothering anyone.
The county ordered Castaneda to get a building permit to keep his home on the property, but will not issue a permit unless he connects to the county's power grid and drills a new water well.
Between $75,000 and $100,000 to bring the electricity to my lot. The only way I have is move out of here. As a matter of fact, I already started doing that.
Castaneda and Gallo are only 2 of many such targets of Los Angeles County's nuisance abatement teams, which were commissioned in 2006 by County Supervisor Mike Antonovich. But the county's heavy-handed tactics are beginning to spur resistance. The story of the Nat raids was told by LA Weekly reporter Mars Melnikoff recently.
They're picking on people who are the most defenseless and have the least resources, and also a lot of the time are most unknowledgeable about their rights.
A group called the Antelope Valley Truckers Organization is fighting back against the county.
You people are the majority. It's we the people.
At this meeting, several attendees had horror stories about encounters with the county.
They had flak jackets on, sidearms, taser guns, M16s, paintball guns.
I lost $2,500 of income because they said that my mobile homes were illegal.
This is intimidation, this is domestic terrorists, this is trespassing.
They said that we had to get rid of everything we have. They pointed to the dirt and said, see that ground right there? We want your whole place to look like that.
But why is the county intent on driving these loners, who rely on themselves and seemingly affect nobody, out of this desert? There are many theories from those being pushed out.
I think it's a future development, putting a highway through here. I think, when the airport comes, the land property's going to be worth something.
There's the High Desert Corridor, which goes from the 14 to the 15. If they can get people off their property and buy that land cheap, somebody can make a lot of money.
I believe it's more control. If they have you living in one place, they can control you better.
Clearing way for an airport or a highway, making plans for housing developments, maybe high-speed rail. This video from the county's Department of Regional Planning contains lengthy descriptions of process, but no insight about the government's goal for land it has cleared of residents.
Gathering community members at 4 different locations across the valley, we first created a common vision for the future.
But to get some real answers, we had to ask the county officials themselves. Unfortunately, our interview requests were turned down, by County Supervisor Mike Antonovich, Deputy District Attorney David Campbell, the Los Angeles County Planning Department, the LA County Department of Public Works, and the Antelope Valley Department of Regional Planning. So, we decided to attend a County Board of Supervisors meeting to ask Mike Antonovich why these individuals are being forced from their homes.
We had made a few requests to talk with Mr. Antonovich to no avail, so that's why I'm here, just to ask a few questions and hopefully get a few answers. We want to know how using nuisance abatement teams to force Antelope Valley residents to destroy their houses and vacate their properties is in the public interest. And that's directed at Mr. Antonovich.
Perhaps I can clarify that the time for public comment doesn't require responses.
We were informed that Antonovich was not required to respond in this public venue, and at the conclusion of the time, Antonovich simply requested written record of the questions and said he would get back to us. Afterwards, we were approached by Antonovich's press secretary, Tony Bell, who refused to comment on camera, but said that the county is simply responding to code violation complaints from neighbors in the area, and any speculation about redevelopment is purely a conspiracy theory. Meanwhile, for a purpose that nobody knows, the county continues driving away the few people who still want to live there.
Anything not covered in the area plan is covered by the countywide general plan. If the general plan is like a house with all the basic rooms, an area plan is like an addition to a house. It adds additional value for some residents, but could not stand alone from the main house. People showed us where the key centers of activity were, what areas were right for what kinds of development, and what places should be preserved. The public can still provide input at every step of the way, so please stay tuned.
What's the best way to save the whales, the dolphins, or most any kind of animal for that matter? During an elaborate sting operation, filmmakers exposed Japan's illegal dolphin hunters. The result? A documentary called The Cove.
And the winner is The Cove.
It took home the Oscar for Best Documentary, but days later, director Luis Sohoyos was back stirring things up.
We used the Oscars as an opportunity to get the team back together to bust the restaurant.
The Hump restaurant in Santa Monica, California was busted after his team's hidden cameras exposed chefs serving sushi made from the endangered sei whale.
Serve whale, go to jail!
The protesters want the place shut down.
No whale should be eaten here, especially not endangered species.
Thanks so much for coming. Appreciate it. Cheers. Everything in the ocean, from the great whales to dolphins to plankton, is being jeopardized. We're raping and harvesting the ocean unsustainably.
Absolutely. It could easily mean the end of a certain species. Species could go extinct.
Christopher Costello is a professor of natural resource economics at UC Santa Barbara. He points out that about a third of the world's fisheries have already collapsed, and many more are quickly heading toward the same fate.
The fish stocks themselves are collapsing, so they're either gone or there's so few of them it's not even worth anybody's time to go try to catch them.
The bottom line is that there's huge profit. Whether it's overfishing or serving endangered whale sushi, the protesters seem to agree that greed is to blame.
Whenever anything immoral is done, there usually is profit behind it.
Do we need more government control to rein in all that greed?
I think there's this really interesting paradox. The more control the government retains for these resources, the less well they're managed.
Costello notes that for the past 50 years we've relied on lawsuits and regulations to try to prevent overfishing, but it hasn't worked. Why not?
First of all, you've got to think about human behavior. Humans are pretty clever, and any regulation you put in, they're going to think of a way to get around it.
Take the fishing season. Government regulators try to preserve fish populations by limiting the fishing season, maybe to a couple of months or a couple of weeks.
The problem is it doesn't limit the catch, it limits the time. So what I do is I go buy a bigger, faster boat, and I can double my catch in that period.
You see it on the TV show The Deadliest Catch, where fishermen use everything from faster boats to better navigation equipment to catch as much crab as quickly as possible.
And almost all scientists now agree that the widespread collapse of fisheries around the world is due to mismanagement.
Why is the ocean in such bad shape?
I love the analogy of a public bathroom.
Same reason public bathrooms are in such bad shape.
Nobody owns them. Nobody has the incentive to keep them up, and the users don't have the incentive to keep them clean.
The public bathroom is a common area owned by no one, but hotel bathrooms are clean because someone owns them.
In fisheries, it's really the same thing. If no one owns it, it becomes mismanaged.
Scientists call it the tragedy of the commons.
Think of the ocean full of fish, and we're all out there trying to exploit it. The tragedy is that we're all going to race to try to get a bigger share of that resource, than the next guy.
How can we fix this tragedy? Give fishermen an incentive to make fish populations grow. It's the only thing that seems to work according to a worldwide study conducted by Costello and his colleagues.
So instead of just having what we call a race to fish, what they do is they allocate the total catch among all the fishermen.
It's called catch shares because fishermen get a share of the total catch. Let's say 200 tons of fish is the total catch allowed by government officials. Fisherman Bob is allowed to catch, say, 1% of the total catch year after year. Now Bob has an incentive to make sure the fish population grows. Why? Well, if there are more fish in the future, the government official can set a higher total catch, and next year Bob's 1% will mean more fish for him.
The poster child of this is the Alaskan halibut.
Overfishing was ravaging the halibut population until the mid-1990s, when officials switched to the catch share method. Since then, the halibut stock has grown dramatically.
The fishermen are doing quite well financially, so it's economically a very profitable fishery.
So many of us are suspicious of the profit motive. However, now it's being harnessed not for plunder, but for preservation. It's happening all over the world, from Alaska's halibut to shrimp in Japan and abalone in New Zealand. Even these guys switched.
Environmental groups like it because it's environmentally sound.
And the Obama administration is thinking about expanding the system.
Stop the slaughter!
So maybe the catch share system could save the whales?
Not food!
Costello points out that unlike fish, whales swim all over the globe, and since they're higher up on the food chain, the ethical issues are more complicated.
Our ethical value says that no marine mammal, no whale should be eaten here.
That view prevailed here because soon after this protest, the hump shut its doors for good.
This was more exciting to me than winning an Oscar because it's like real concrete results.
Saving the whales may be trickier, but at least we know that expanding the catch share system could save the fish.
So if we think about the incentives, and we think about the design carefully, we can get this jointly beneficial thing of the economy and the environment.
And what if we don't change course? Well, most of the world's fisheries could collapse within a matter of decades. For Reason TV, I'm Ted Balaker.